Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. From the unknown precursor of the Big Bang to the eventual demise of the universe, from the first moments of evolution to the latest version of the smartphone, from dust into stars to supernova radiation, from that baby's first breath to your last dying day, when you're on Earth all the way. And while you're here, why not stop a moment to appreciate the finer things that life has to offer? Savor a fine wine, the subtle scent of dew, the view of nature uninterrupted, or the touch and feel of a lover's hand set to the sound of rushing water. And once your basic senses have been thoroughly indulged in endorphin hijacking activities, let's move on to something really interesting. The world beyond your senses. The world as it can only be conceived by the scientific intellect. The world of truth. The world of mind. The world of science. And when the alluring endorphin siren songs of earthly delight can only be ignored for so long, let us take this next hour to focus on what else the universe can have in store for us on This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Blair.
Good science to you, and happy Thursday, Justin.
Happy Thursday. I know you have not tuned in to a different show than you're usually watching at this time. This is This Week in Science. Kirsten is on vacation, but she's vacationing in sciencey ways, so it's forgiven. And with me instead is Blair. It's not really instead, because you're here every week, but you're co-hosting this week instead of co-hosting.
I feel like a big girl.
Wow. So today we have an amazing, incredible show. There's more interesting stories than we're going to be able to get to, I think, this week, because Blair brought a ton of stories, and I can't wait to hear them all.
Well, what did you bring, Justin?
I've got fit frogs, neurotic IQs, tracking down toxoplasma gondii, and if there's time for it, an actual real time machine that was built.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds nice. Very interesting.
What did you have for us, Blair?
Well, in the flavor of my usual Animal Corner stories, I did bring some stories about strange animal sex. Also, genes that code for niceness, patented plants, and a link between social stature and immunity.
Social stature and your immunity. Interesting. Well, I think the time machine probably should be the first story to run with.
Yeah, go for it.
So instead, I'm going to go with the physically fit frogs. Because then it's a teaser, right? Because then people have to stick around to hear about the actual real time machine that was recently built. So physically fit frogs found to have faster changing genomes. New study says, citing poison frogs from South and Central America, stretches of DNA accumulate changes over time, but the rate of those changes build up vary considerably between different species. So one of the longstanding sort of puzzles is, why is it that some species, their genome seems to have lots of change, and some species seem to have very little at all? So they've focused on lots of stuff like body size, how many offspring they have, their lifespan, this sort of thing, to sort of try to figure out why one versus the other. But recently they found something very interesting in this study, which is that they found a correlation between the physical activity of this poisonous frog and the amount of gene changes that were taking place in it versus other frogs that were less active, basically. And I love this quote here. This is Santos, who's one of the researchers in this study. Animals rarely just sit there. If you go to the wild, you'll see animals hunting, reproducing, and running to avoid being eaten. The energetic cost of these activities is far beyond the minimum amount of energy an animal needs to function. So what they they made a correlation here too. It's that it may be free radicals, because in the process of exercise, your body actually creates a lot of these free radicals that get floating around in there, and I think there may be some sort of a correlation between that and more rapid changes to the DNA. It's not a proven thing yet. That's at the moment, the best sort of correlative idea of what may be going on. But physically fit species are more efficient at extracting oxygen from each breath and delivering it to working muscles, which also then contributes to those free radicals. So the more you exercise, the more likely you will alter your DNA for the future.
That's interesting. So they were saying that these frogs, they have or they haven't changed their DNA very much.
They're finding that there are more changes in really active frogs than in frogs that they have a more laissez-faire lifestyle, less fit frogs.
That's interesting. Well, I wonder if the how much they're moving around is related to how much in danger they are, because if they're not that much in danger, ideally they're pretty actually fit to their environment, so they wouldn't have to adapt as much, right?
Yeah, I also wonder if it's if you took this correlation between predator and prey, is really active predators showing more genomic change than an animal that's a pretty lazy predator, like say an alligator or something that can sort of sit for really long periods of time and wait for the prey to come close and then snap at it, versus like say a cheetah or something.
I wonder how they're measuring how active an animal is too, because, for example, lions are probably really active when they're hunting, but they sleep for about 20 hours a day. So all in all, I would say that is not a super active animal. So I wonder how that would rate.
So they basically put them on a hamster wheel in this study. They had the frogs running on in a rotating plastic tube that resembles a hamster wheel, and measured their oxygen uptake after 4 minutes of exercise. The friskiest frogs had aerobic capacities that were 5 times higher than the most sluggish of frog species, and were able to run longer before they got tired. The physically fit species therefore were more efficient at extracting the oxygen. So, and then to estimate the rate at which each species' genome changed over time, he reconstructed the poison frog family tree using sequences from 15 different frog genes. When he estimated the number of mutations, the number of changes to the DNA for each species over time, a clear pattern emerged. The athletic frogs tended to have the faster changing genomes. They tested for other frog factors as well, such as body and clutch sizes, but athletic prowess of the frog continued to be the only factor which was consistently correlated with the pace of their evolution. And this is one of these very Lamarckian things that pure Darwinians sometimes get irritated with, or used to. I think probably much less so today, because we've learned a lot more about epigenetics and the like. But the idea that the way that you interact with your environment affects your genes that you pass on to the next generation. Not perhaps can't perhaps do it as quickly as mate selection, but as a overall trend of a species is probably the driving factor. So if everybody's having to run all the time, makes sense now. That's affecting the genes so that the next generation can run longer, can take up more oxygen, can do those things that are required. And sure, the selection is part of that too. The ones that perhaps make those genomic changes quicker in the group perhaps prosper and mate more, and then that's sort of the natural selection takes over at that point. But the real root of it would come from some sort of epigenetic change or something along the lines of what they may be witnessing here.
Right. And I guess you could take that to say that if you're healthy, it's going to help your children, not just yourself too, right? Because you're going to be able to pass on genomic changes to your progeny, I guess. So that's interesting.
The way this is described too, it kind of makes you think of DNA as a muscle. Because muscle, the way you build up more muscle is you first tear it down. You weaken and tear the muscles, and then when it rebuilds, there's more mass there, and you become stronger. And it almost sounds like that's what's happening with the DNA. The physical activity, when it stops, a rush of blood and oxygen circulation is restored to the tissues, and it then produces a burst of free radicals that cause wear and tear on DNA itself, eventually causing the genetic changes that, if they affect the DNA of cells, that make eggs or sperm, can be passed on to future generations. So it's kind of an interesting, you're sort of disrupting or tearing up the old DNA a little bit. But it seems as though if evolution is any example, those tearings are necessary to build a better, stronger poison tree frog.
So basically, all animals just get off the couch, get going. It's going to help you and your kids.
Includes people. Because, while the animals have to hunt and reproduce and run to avoid being eaten, we have to work and reproduce and avoid enormous debt, it's pretty much the same thing as what goes on in the animal kingdom.
Yeah. All right. Well, my first story, pretty interesting stuff. Apparently, niceness is a genetically derived trait. So, yeah. Interesting stuff. It's kind of a way to get out of being nice to people. You can always just say, oh, I was just made that way. It's in my genes. Can't help it.
I was born this way.
Yeah. What can I say?
She's born wrong.
So oxytocin and vasopressin are hormones that are credited with making us sociable, caring, and nice in general. And so scientists recently found specific genetic receptors that make the hormones more effective. Researchers at University of Buffalo and UC Irvine took some experimental subjects, 711 of them, so that's actually a pretty big social study, I guess, and asked them about how they perceived the world and gave them scenarios about how they would treat people. And they found that participants who found the world threatening and kind of were pessimistic about the nature of people were less likely to help others. That is, unless they had the versions of the receptor genes that are associated with niceness. So if you already had an optimistic view on the world and you thought people were fundamentally nice and you didn't feel threatened by the world around you, you were generally nice to people anyway, which makes sense, kind of that what goes around comes around thing. But if you were already skeptical of the nature of man and the people around you and the world around you, but you had this gene, you were still nice and courteous to other people. Interesting stuff.
So wait. So you could actually be a psychopath, but if you have this gene, you're a very pleasant and polite psychopath.
Right. Let me get that bag for you. It looks heavy.
Let me get this bag for you, because you're obviously too weak to.
Who's the serial killer? Like, there's been a lot of those serial killers who were like really nice, right?
Yeah.
Is it Ted Bundy? Is he one of those that like? Maybe that's how they get away with it. They just have that nice gene.
Yeah, so it's interesting because there was the nature versus nurture thing kind of involved in this. Is if you've been brought up to have a good view on the world around you, you're just going to be a nice person anyway. So that is something about your upbringing and all that kind of stuff. But if you have this gene, even if you're brought up to look at the world around you as a sick, dark place, you're still going to be nice to other people.
Yeah, and the other thing too is chances are if you have this genetic nice gene, you likely inherited it from your parents, so they're likely nice people, so they likely raised you in a nicer environment. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that once it gets, it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle of niceness, really, it's not really that vicious. It's a pleasant
What's really
cycle.
going to get interesting is if we can start inserting the niceness gene just into everyone when they're growing. And then everyone
that's
will be
gonna be-
nice, right?
That's going to be so terrible.
I mean, it's, I like positive people. I like, I can't really.
I don't really have a whole lot of tolerance for people who like want to, just complain all the time or what. I don't know, whatever. Just who are mean to other people or snarky or,
petty and stuff. But on the other hand,
it's nice that they're there to balance the world a little bit. You wouldn't want to get rid of them. It's like if it wasn't for them, all the nice people would just be, yeah, they're nice, but whatever. Nice.
If
people.
everyone was Mr. Rogers, you'd get pretty bored pretty quick, I think.
Yeah. or then like somebody like Captain Kangaroo would come along and people would be like, that's outrageous behavior. That's off the you can't behave like that in public. Oh my goodness. So what else we got? We have is it time for the time machine? Should we talk about the time machine that was invented?
Yeah,
No,
go
not
for
yet.
it.
Not yet. Okay.
No.
So instead of that, this is a pretty standard territory that we've delved into many times in the show before. Toxoplasma gondii. Scientists have identified specific strains of Toxoplasma gondii, the parasite that causes toxoplasmosis. It is most strongly associated with premature births, severe birth defects in the United States and Brazil. It's really horrible. That's a very particularly aggressive strain there. Lots of high incidence of childhood blindness resulting from it. This is, of course, also the parasite that causes people to alter their behavior, causes women to have guilt issues, can cause many forms of schizophrenia. So it's and it only comes from cats. Cats are the vector. It only completes its life cycle in cats. So cats are the vector for this. So you can see how, the estimates are anywhere from 25 to 35% of the U.S. world population is infected with this parasite because, of course, it's right there in a domestic animal. And when a rat becomes infected with this toxoplasmosis, it becomes not only not afraid of cats, which is interesting, but it becomes attracted to the scent of cat urine, right? So, but what really I haven't understood, and this story was illuminating to me, is that there are specific strains of the Toxoplasma gondii that do act differently, which sort of hinted at by the fact that the rates are so high in Brazil for childhood blindness that it was either a more aggressive strain down there of some sort, or that the entire population was getting heavy loads of Toxoplasma gondii parasites. But it looks like there are different strains that can individually be more aggressive than others. And they were looking at how pregnant women. So this is mostly focused on children, and this has a happy ending. So bear with me a minute. Pregnant women can become infected with T. gondii through contact with cat feces or anywhere that a cat has gone and dropped one of these parasites, like on the kitchen counter or chair or coffee mug, wherever the cat goes. You can also get it from undercooked meat. They're throwing up a picture of a cat on the.
Don't judge me, Justin.
All kittens are evil until proven innocent. So it can cause pregnancies to end in miscarriage, or just premature, or have babies that have either severe eye or even brain damage. And the quote here is, if undetected or untreated, congenital toxoplasmosis can have serious consequences for a child's quality of life, noted NIAID Director Anthony S. Fauci. The findings from this study support the value of screening for toxoplasmosis to identify patients who could benefit from the treatment. So there are blood tests available to determine whether a person has ever been infected with any strain of Toxoplasma parasite, because I guess when the parasite goes, it ends up in your brain and it can't complete its life cycle there because it's not in a cat, so it just dies. The experimental test developed at NIAID improves upon older tests because it can detect the presence of strain-specific antibodies that distinguish infecting strains from one another. Test was developed by NIAID's Laboratory of Parasitic Diseases. And it was applied to blood samples collected between 1981 and 2009 as part of a national collaborative Chicago-based congenital toxoplasmosis study. Study was directed at infected children and looking at what could be done about treatment. So there's at least 15. This I really didn't know. At least 15 distinct T. gondii strains that have been found throughout the world. In France, they've done quite a bit of research into the strains, which are the most common there. A strain called type 2 predominates. Type 2 parasites can be distinguished from all other strains and are collectively termed not exclusively type 2 strains, which are the other ones. And there's another one, NE2. So the new test, researchers found evidence of either type 2 or NE2 infections in 183 of the mother-child pairs in the National Toxoplasmosis Study. They discovered that the NE2 parasites were more likely to be associated with premature birth, and infants infected with these strains were more likely to have the severe manifestations of disease than those infected by the regular type 2 parasite. But the numbers are pretty staggering. For example, severe eye damage was seen in 67% of the NE2 cases, just 59 out of the 88 children, while the other one, which is the least damaging, was still 39%. Severe eye damage in 39% of those children. So this is a really egregious disease, and it goes up massively underreported for the high level of risk and the high rates of infection throughout the United States and throughout the world. And in France, all pregnant women are screened for a toxoplasma infection. It's 100%. We don't do that here in the United States. But the good news in all of this, though, is that they have basically, once caught, they can identify whether or not you have toxoplasmosis, what type it is, and there is a way to treat a newborn. And in the cases that they're reporting here, those with NE2 parasites had almost demonstrated outcomes that are equal or good to not being infected. Not in every instance was the outcome favorable, but it was pretty wild that they treated many of the babies diagnosed shortly after birth, and they were treated and they suffered no ill effects later on down the road, because it's something that it's not you're born with it exactly, but it sort of develops soon after. So there are treatments out there now that can, and this is the sort of thing. We don't have it. Well, we will soon enough, though. I mean, we will quickly, but really there is another method of prevention. You know, this is going to save some of the children, be able to reduce some of this. It still has, and there are drugs out there that they give a toxoplasmosis drug to people suffering from schizophrenia, sort of as a test. Because in some of those cases, this is actually how they discovered the connection, because it would reverse effects of schizophrenia. Because there's a type of schizophrenia that is brought on by this parasite going into your brain. But really, the one way to cure this, the one way to really prevent, is vector control. You have a disease vector, you need to prevent it from having access to the population. Right. So, but people love their cats more than they love babies. So we're not gonna handle the. We're not gonna take care of the. Is that really? Now there's a picture up there on the web of. Is that a dog or a cat? That doesn't look like a cat.
That's definitely like a cat.
That looks like a Yeti.
Well, what's funny with cats that makes them so different from other pets that we have is that they go out and in and out and in. And so they can come and bring whatever they want back into our house, which is so odd. They go and do whatever they want. We don't know where they are. We don't know how long they're there, who they're playing with, what they're eating. Then they come back into the house. So I kind of shudder to think of all the different things they could be bringing to us. It's kind of scary.
All along, they've got the worst one. I mean, we put a little tray It's somewhere in the house a lot of times. Okay, could you please, if you're going to deposit, could you deposit some here in the house, and I'll pick it up and clean it later and let the dust go everywhere. Could you put your brain parasites, brain parasite disease here in this tray, and then really get your paws in there. Get your paws in there and mash it down and really get involved with it. And then, oh, it's so cute when you jump up on the kitchen counter and I'll make you a little bowl of food right there on the counter. Isn't that sweet? And yeah, it's dangerous, and it's nothing. It's not the cat's fault, but the Black Plague wasn't exactly the fault of rats, but it doesn't mean anyway. Cat lovers hate this story, and by extension, me forever bringing it up, but it's for real, people.
Yeah, we just need to hose our cats down every time they come in the house. I'm sure they'll love that, right? All right. Well, if you've just tuned in, you're listening to This Week in Science, and I think it's time for Blair's Animal Corner.
Blair's Animal Corner with Blair.
Yay. So I have two very interesting stories about animal sex this week. What else? First, I wanted to talk about newts. Red-spotted newts, that's an East Coast variety of newt. It turns out the females really dig a male newt with big, oozing kidneys. So, yeah. Other animals, lions have manes, peacocks have those long tails, males have secondary sexual characteristics that will attract a female. These guys, it's all about the kidneys. So these newts and other amphibians, just to give you guys a little background, they reproduce when the males, they produce a sperm-filled jelly called a spermatophore. They release it into the environment. The female collects it into her body, and she stores it until she's ready to use it. Interesting stuff. And the Southeast Missouri State University took a few of these newts every year, and they dissected the male newts and checked out their kidneys. And during the mating season, the kidneys were swollen. The canals leading from the kidneys were swollen as well, and they were oozing an unidentified liquid. They only did that during mating season. And it was a glycoprotein, which is a protein bonded to a carbohydrate. They're still not clear what it is or what it does, but they do know that the liquid drains into the Wolffian ducts that house sperm. And so the best theory they have right now is that it helps boost the sperm's motility or lifespan. But they do know that there's a correlation between having those large kidneys and getting selected for mating. The other interesting thing is that salamanders, other amphibians, lizards, and snakes, a lot of them will have similar liquid oozing when they reproduce as well. Because, reptiles and amphibians and also birds have a cloaca. It's kind of an all-in-one hole. So a lot of things come out of one area. So during mating, a lot of unidentified things can be involved. So they found that out, which is pretty interesting. It's a big...
So wait, how in the world you can't recognize? They're not, my nude anatomy isn't perfect, but the kidneys aren't on the outside, right?
No. That's the part of the story that I don't quite understand as well, is that I'm not sure how the females can indicate large kidneys from the outside.
Yeah, it's I wonder if that ooze is creating a scent. Is it putting a twinkle in the eye? It's like, what is...
It could also be that, I don't know the exact mating habits. There could be several spermatophores in one area, and the ladies pick the one that has the kidney juice on it. I don't know.
And exactly, how do they collect it?
Well... similar to how you would assume. It's like a middle ground in between fish. Fish are just kind of the males and the females just kind of layer their stuff on top of each other in the water. And then we know how everybody else does it. And then the amphibians are kind of in the middle. So the male has this packet and it gets transferred to the female. But there's not direct opposition of parts.
Oh, poor newts.
They don't have much in that way to work with anyway. So
well, not to you, but to a newt maybe. To a newt, that's quite significant.
I guess I'm being insensitive. Newts out there, I apologize if you're listening.
Apologize to the Newt Gingrich fans out there. All right, wait a second. We're getting off track. We have a lot of science to get to. I think, though, we may be at that good point where we should go to the break.
Okay, that sounds good.
Let's head off to the break. We'll be back in just a few more moments with more This Week in Science. Stay tuned.
Twis would like to thank Audible.com for sponsoring this episode of This Week in Science. Audible.com is the leading provider of audiobooks with over 75,000 different titles in a variety of genres. Twis has found many science-based books in the Audible library. You can start a free trial today and get any audiobook download for free. All you have to do is sign up at audiblepodcast.com/twis. TWIS. Go to audiblepodcast.com/twist now for your free download. Twis also has merchandise you might enjoy. Head over to twis.org to purchase our 2010 Science Music Compilation CD. Yes, I said CD, and a World Robot Domination t-shirt. Twis is supported by listeners like you. Your donations pay for our hosting, bandwidth, contractors we need to hire, and fun things we try to do for the show. We appreciate any amount, $2, $5, $10, $100. You make this show possible. We accept donations through PayPal and have made the process easy by putting donation buttons on each show page on our website, www.twis.org. So go to the website, listen to the most recent episode, comment on the show, and make a donation. We thank you for your support. We couldn't do it without you.
Put on a pair of goggles and go looking for the things I couldn't see. I couldn't see. I couldn't see. I couldn't see. Can't explain the things you heard with more than intuition. The line of reason shows the way to go. No conclusion. The methods of hypothesis and patience are the only things I need. Put on a pair of goggles and go looking for the things I couldn't see. The answers lie somewhere within this scatter plot. Our first assumptions were correct. Disprove the rest. It's hard. The methods of hypothesis and patience are the only things I need. Put on a pair of goggles and go looking for the things I couldn't see.
And we're back with more This Week in Science. Blair, you still there, Blair?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there
Sorry.
she is. Oh, I thought you were gone.
No, I'm here. Is it time for a time machine yet? Or do I have to wait some more?
Very soon. Very soon. Very soon. Although I may find out later that we lost the entire audience in the build-up to the time machine story, and I might go back and put it at the head of the show. But I'm not worried about it. I don't really worry about anything. And in fact, that's the lead into my next story, which is why being a neurotic warrior isn't a bad thing necessarily. At least it's not as bad as being a normal warrior, a normal everyday warrior. In a study of anxiety and intelligence, patients with generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, were compared with healthy volunteers to assess the relationship between intelligence, the intelligence quotient IQ, worry, and subcortical white matter metabolism of choline. In a control group of normal volunteers, high IQ was associated with lower degree of worry. Those who worried more had lower IQs. But don't worry. If you're like one of these generalized anxiety disorder, Richard Lewis types that worries about every possible thing, the opposite was true when they studied those with the generalized anxiety disorder. Those showed that the higher IQ was associated with the most extreme degrees of worry, while those who had generalized anxiety disorder but weren't too worried about it, they had the lower IQ of the bunch.
Is that because the smarter you are, the more you think about things and the more wound up you get? And then you think, well, if I make this mistake, then this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens. You can't turn your brain off?
Right. That might be it, except that the opposite is true with those who don't have the anxiety disorder. For the generalized public, the higher IQ worried less. So so it's kind of an interesting correlation there. Although one of the things that they kind of point to in this that might be why this is sort of taking place, if you can associate higher income with higher IQ, money may not buy happiness, but it pays off misery and worry like nothing else can, right? So it could be an economic trend between worry that they're actually seeing, right? That's the sort of other layer that's not really directly looked at in this study, but it's very possible that those with without the anxiety disorder who are very intelligent also worry less because there's less to worry about if you're having a successful run on the carousel of life. Whereas if you have constant money woes, you might be worrying more. Then it kind of becomes more interesting. The generalized anxiety disorder, those who worry the most have the highest IQ. And then it's, I think, right to what you said, they think of more things they can worry about. Because those with the higher IQ may find many more things to have anxiety about. And therefore, they're the greater worriers of the bunch. So kind of an interesting study. The volunteer group in this was so small as to almost make it insignificant. They had something like 26 patients overall.
Sample size, people. Sorry. Come on.
It was 26 with the generalized anxiety disorder, and another 18 for the control group. So right. not the broadest of studies. Hard to read a whole lot into it. And there is that other layer of correlation of IQ and economics, which could sort of, throw this whole study out the window.
Yeah, I think so much goes into anxiety and worry in the human life that it'd be really hard to effectively measure any one thing as being affected or affecting that. It seems like there's so many factors going into that. There's genetics, there's, sleep habits, there's nutrition, there's all sorts of things that could affect your worry, but also your current IQ too.
Right. But I think money takes care of like 90% of it. I mean, yeah, more money, more problems, right? You hear that. And so there isn't any out of worry just because you have a level of wealth, truly, especially if your wealth comes from running a very complicated, demanding profession or business or number of businesses. Then certainly you would expect there to be a lot of stress and a lot of things to worry about, you know.
So not necessarily.
It depends on how you got that money, how much you have and how much you have to work. I don't know. How much of your profession is dependent on that continuing, I guess, too. So economics really, that's what I said is completely not true. I can't back it up.
Or are people who worry less more successful? You could go the other way around with it. Maybe if you don't worry as much, you don't get in your own way in the professional world and you end up making more money.
See, Blair, that's okay. So right there, we've just created a PhD thesis study for somebody to do. We stumble across these every once in a while. That's a fantastic one. Measure the amount of worry and compare that to successful leaders in business and the like, and see if they're the big worriers or if the guy at the bottom of the company punching the clock is worried more.
Right.
Or if he's like, you know.
Well, and then how do you measure worry?
Late.
Because the guy in the mailroom might be worried about how he's going to pay the rent this week, but then the guy up in the CEO office might be worried about the big merger coming up.
Sure, and I think those are equal. In terms of being worried about something or obsessing over a thing or thinking about it at night, I think those, in that level, you would take them as equal. Because then you're just, how are you stressed as an organism? Almost, right? But yeah,
I think you'd have to look at things like pulse and your sleep patterns and maybe muscle tightening and things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Anyway, I have a very interesting story in relation to a couple weeks ago. I was talking about Roundup and runoff and how it was affecting amphibians. I have another story involving Roundup and the Monsanto Corporation. They have patented soybean seeds. In 1994, they obtained a patent covering a line of Roundup Ready crops that they had genetically modified. So Roundup Ready meant you could spray these soybeans all over with Roundup and it wouldn't affect the soybeans. It would just take care of the weeds around the soybeans.
Right.
So just for a second, first think about the fact that all these soybeans we're eating have been doused in Roundup and that what we learned about amphibians and Roundup before. But then putting that aside, so they've patented these soybeans. They also made a licensing agreement based on that patent where any farmer that bought the soybeans had to promise not to replant future generations because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't a single-time sale. They wanted to sell these seeds every single year, which then you have to think about.
They're in a contract. They contracted them, too, with pretty devastating, consequences. Huge dollar amount consequences if they replanted or began, reseeding off of the same harvest.
Right. And so over time, so many farmers have started buying these Roundup Ready soybeans. It now, just for an example, in Indiana is 94% of all soybeans planted by acre in the state are these Roundup Ready Monsanto soybeans.
Right.
However, farmers are free to sell the soybeans in commodity markets to feed people or livestock. So this one guy, knowing that 94% of these soybeans in Indiana are Roundup Ready, bought some of those beans in a commodity market and planted them.
Criminal.
And he thought there was nothing wrong with that. Because if he bought soybeans without knowing whether they were Roundup Ready or not and just planted them. He signed
no contract. Right.
He signed no contract. What's wrong with that? Well, Monsanto sued him. And he claimed that it was okay because of this thing called the exhaustion doctrine, which means a patent holder's rights in a particular product are exhausted when the product is sold to an end user. He was the end user because it was at a market, and he wasn't going to sell them anymore as beans to plant. So he was the end user. And because he wasn't required to sign a licensing agreement, especially, he said, I have no binding reason to not plant these beans. However, the United States Court of Appeals ruled in favor of Monsanto. Basically, now every farmer that wants to plant a soybean that they have bought at a commodity market is going to have to test their seeds to figure out whether they are Roundup resistant or not before planting them to protect themselves from being sued.
Right, and here's the other thing that's going on, and I have a solution to this, but even though I'm not a lawyer, I probably should have been, because I've got the answer to this. So one of the things that can happen is you can get transpollination, or you can get...
Right.
So farmer A has a Monsanto wheat crop that's growing there. Farmer B doesn't. If the seeds from farmer A's fly into farmer B's field and start growing, suddenly you've got Monsanto crop in that field. What's been happening is Monsanto's been sending people out and testing crops from farmer B's all across the country. And if they find their strain, they then sue the farmer.
Right.
And require them to destroy their crop. With the auspice of you have gotten pirated, seeds. Somehow you've gone to the black market to acquire seeds. You've got these illegally. You shouldn't be allowed to have them. The defense I would take on this would actually be an offense. Every time that they discovered that their seeds were on my land and couldn't prove that I had purchased those seeds anywhere, I would in turn sue them for the entire retail value of what my crop would have been worth, because it is now useless, right? It is now is not the product that I planted. You infected my field with a patented territory, whatever it is, the legal word.
Proprietary.
Thank you. I won't say it again. Proprietary seed. So if you've ruined my crop, I am now due the full retail value of my entire crop, what it would have been. Unfortunately, our farmers, and I live in the middle of farm country here. Farmer people are salt of the earth, and I don't mean that in a derogatory, like they're not intelligent, but most deals in farming are made on a handshake. Literally, they don't do big long contracts to sell goods and services to each other. They say, hey, I tell you what, I'll give you all the seeds to plant your watermelon field this year if I can get all those seeds, because it's going to be more seeds back. If I can get, my seeds plus like that amount again back the following year. They just shake hands and, they're good. So they're not going out there looking for ways to sue Monsanto. They don't hire lawyers to do that sort of stuff. They're not looking for those things.
Monsanto's lawyers are probably a lot more effective than any farmer in Indiana's lawyers.
Right.
Unfortunately. Right. But this has always been my issue with genetically modified crops. And, a lot of people have a lot of issues with genetically modified foods. But my big issue is containment. If we find there's something wrong with these genetically modified foods down the road, oh no, this Roundup resistant soybean is causing such and such birth defects or whatever, we have no way of containing that genetic modification to get our pure soybeans back. Before we know it, everything's going to be genetically modified. And that's the really scary thing about these crops to me, is that we don't have any sort of leash on them. They're just out there.
Right. They're out there, and they're also, nature has been finding the workarounds. So I believe it's the corn crops currently that there's this invasive fungus that's attacking the roots. That wasn't a problem before, but is being overcome in the new, Monsanto crop. And so now they're like, wow, we've got this planted everywhere. So now every one of the crops is vulnerable because we're using all the same seed stock. Now, one of the things, though, too, is Monsanto is doing something, and I always want to point this out. They are doing something incredibly good for the seed market, which is they're heavily involved in testing seeds for viruses and seed and soil for viruses, mostly the seeds themselves, because you can plant seed that has a virus in it and in the ground, and then that crop comes up. This virus is infecting the plant and it dies. That virus is now in that soil. And as the world becomes a global seed market, that's going to become increasingly more critical. And there really isn't another organization. And there's no FDA or agriculture department that has that capability to look over and sort of screen for that sort of stuff. And they are working on crops that can be grown with less water in areas of the world that, typically haven't been ag land, transforming ag land. So some of what I look at with the farmers, and a lot of these farmers too, there was a day when their farm was the first one that had a motorized tractor on it. And all the other farmers were PO'd that they were putting out these big crops with very little physical work while they're still out there with a mule and a plow, right? So there is progress, there is change that's going to be made, and it is going to be tough. And could Monsanto be doing a better job at mitigating that? Absolutely. I think the whole the suing of farmers and across this country has got to be put to an end. But big money and big influence, it's going to be tough.
Well, and the other really scary thing that Monsanto has been looking into is they have been trying to code genes in these crops that will make them infertile to next generations, so that they won't have to sue farmers, so that they just don't create progeny. So basically, if they can't create a second generation and then that gene gets out and passes to other crops that aren't encoded with that gene, then suddenly are we going to end up with the extinction of a crop if all of these plants can't reproduce? That's the really scary thing to me about Monsanto, is I don't feel like they're thinking 2 steps ahead of themselves with some of these genetic modifications that they're putting in.
Well, I think they are, because I think what they're realizing that is that if you have to keep buying seed only from them, and they have a kill switch in the seeds, the thing dies off every generation, they can corner the world's food market. I mean, never mind a particular commodity, So it's one of these, and right now they're in big competition with a Chinese company who's probably got a little bit of an edge on them in these same sorts of processes. So it comes down to 2 companies that are taking over global seed, global food markets, then basically worldwide. And that is something the politicians and the people have to become aware of at some point. Maybe it's a monopoly thing. Maybe it's something that needs to get broken up. But I would, and this is the tough part. This is where I'm like going against just what is intuitively good and right decision making in the world. Sometimes I think it's okay to let a big monopoly run away with the technology in a direction, with the idea that someday we can break them up into smaller companies. I think we got the railroads through monopoly. I think we got telecommunications through monopoly. I think we've got the entire tech, the PC computer, Microsoft, really a monopoly for a good chunk of the time. I'm glad it didn't get beaten up into little pieces. We may still not have standardized technology, So there's a little bit of wanting to let the leash go out a little bit before it gets pulled in. But
a monopoly on food seems kind of dangerous, though, don't you think?
Yes, I do. I absolutely agree with you. No, I do. I agree with you. A monopoly on food is, and yeah. But even, there's not a lot. But there's not even a lot of the small farmer left, too. I mean, there are small farms out there, certainly in this area. I know lots of farming families, but they're competing against mega farms throughout the nation, too. So, if all the mega farms are trying to consolidate their seed delivery, their seed source, it's just a scale. It's a scaling thing then, too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of gray areas out there. But Justin, now is it time to tell me about a time machine?
A time machine? I think, you know what? I think we're getting near the end of the hour. We may not have time now to, hang on. Actually, we're out of time. We don't have time to do this.
You have to get in that time machine and go backwards so that I can hear the story.
It's right. Just give me a second. Okay. Whew. I'm back. A time machine has been built at UCLA. Wow. This will allow scientists to study the past. That is so wild. Huh. Yeah, it's a 5-ton instrument, the most advanced and sophisticated of its kind in the world, and goes by the name MOSFIRE. The MOSFIRE, a multi-object spectrometer for infrared exploration, has been installed in the Keck 1 telescope at the WM Keck Observatory atop Mauna Kea in Hawaii. So this telescope gathers light in infrared wavelengths invisible to the human eye, allowing it to penetrate cosmic dust and see distant objects whose light has been stretched or redshifted into the infrared by the expansion of the universe. The instrument was designed to study the most distant, faintest galaxies, says UCLA physics and astronomy professor Ian McLean. When we look at the most distant galaxies, we see them not as they are now, but as they were when the light left them that is just now arriving here. Some of the galaxies that we are studying were formed some 10 billion years ago. Only a few billion years after the Big Bang. We are looking back in time to an era of the formation of some of the very first galaxies, which are small and very faint. This is an era that we need to study if we were going to understand the large-scale structure of the universe. With MOSFIRE, it now becomes easier to identify faint galaxies, families of galaxies, and merging galaxies. The instrument will also will enable detailed observations of planets orbiting nearby stars, star formations within our own galaxy, distribution of dark matter in the universe, and who knows what else once they get a beacon. Because right now we're anywhere from, and it depends on where you're reading the estimates, but it's anywhere between like 13.7 to maybe 14.5 billion years back in time that we've been able to look. And I think he's saying so that right now some of the galaxies they're studying formed 10 billion years ago. But if this is actually going to be able to see the faintest of galaxies, you would think that it will be actually pushing that limit further and further back. We may even push back the date of the Big Bang if it can look back far enough.
So just to clarify, I can't go meet Abraham Lincoln or anything like that in here. I can look at stars though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much you can look
you
at
got me
stars.
a little excited, I have to say.
Oh, well, good. So MOSFIRE cost $14 million and likely would have cost twice as much, but it was actually built by the scientists themselves. So that's kind of a neat thing. McLean, he's got a quote here. My father, who was an engineer, called me an astronomer by inclination, a physicist by training, and an engineer by default. I'm an applied physicist and an astronomer. Sounds like his father was quite a good influence on him. Aww. And this was, a lot of the funding. Some of the funding came through the National Science Foundation, but also a good bit of the funding came from the Gordon and Betty Moore. Gordon Moore is the co-founder, former chairman, chief executive officer of Intel Corp, of whom McLean says he is a wonderful man with a penetrating intellect. We are deeply indebted to him and hope to be able to show him MOSFIRE this summer. Very cool.
Neat.
Technology and science. They go so good together.
Yeah,
And we
that's
got
so cool. I mean, I wonder where this is all going to end, how far back we're going to end up looking by looking at farther and farther away from us. It's pretty interesting. You wonder where it's going to end.
And the funny thing is it's always possible that we don't have a good view of the universe. It's always possible that we haven't seen the last of the big frontiers, right? So you go back in time 100 years, we're 120 something years. There was another galaxy, but it was still, we thought it was this dust cloud in our galaxy, this one nebula, right? It turns out all the stars that we knew, the entire universe up until, not too long ago, was the Milky Way. That was the definition of the universe. And while some scientists may have thought it was possible that they had seen to the very ends of the universe, it wasn't possible for them to see outside of a section of the Milky Way. They were, couldn't look but in the local sky area. Now we know there are many galaxies, not many. How many would you, how do you say? Billions upon billions, 70 sextillion. By the conservative estimate, there are 70 sextillion. That's, I think, a 7D with like 21 zeros after it. 70 sextillion galaxies. The other Milky Ways, bigger than the Milky Way, smaller than the Milky Way, scattered everywhere. And that's our best estimate, or that's the conservative estimate for the number of galaxies in the known universe. The actual number, the further we look, we could find that we're in just one 70 sextillion cluster of galaxies.
Right.
And that there are many more beyond.
Well, and then I get into this circular thinking when I start thinking about space and how far we can look out there. If you keep looking farther and farther, the way you were saying the speed of light works, you keep looking backwards and backwards in time and you look farther and farther out. And if you think about looking all the way back to when the Big Bang happened, then do you end up seeing an edge of the universe from where it expanded? It's pretty trippy stuff to think about, actually.
I sort of picture the old TV sign-off, like you'd get the multicolored bars. Just like, stay tuned for more programming tomorrow. Little jet flyover. No, I don't know. And then what's beyond the beyond, man? Like, what's going on beyond? Nobody knows, and that's why science is so exciting, because there's possibilities that we will. It's very possible that we will actually get to some of these answers, right? We're at the height of all scientific and technological ability, which actually every generation has been able to make that claim. We've always been at the very forefront of science and technology. But the rate at which they're advancing right now is a quicker pace than has ever happened before. It took us quite some time to get through the last 10,000 years without really. I mean, you're always at the cutting edge, but the cutting edge isn't that different from the cutting edge 50 to 100 years ago. But the rate at which things change now. I mean, we started doing this show 7 years ago, and a lot of what we talk about today would have everything would have made, would have been shattered, just amazing. You go back to a time before Hubble's deep field, and we knew there were other galaxies. I mean, there were lots of other galaxies. We had no idea how many. We really didn't know how. We didn't know there were planets. Now we know there's planets. There's thousands of planets we're finding circling these other stars. We know there's water in space. We know there's water on Mars. We know there's water on the moon. The things that we're discovering about the universe it's faster than Moore's law. Even it's rapidly approaching a point where we're going to leave a lot of humanity behind. Because if you're not paying attention to the science tip, if you're not listening to shows like This Week in Science or Nova specials, if you're not getting some sort of updates here and there, there's going to be too much to cover at some point.
That's true.
Yeah, I know. Imagine 20 years from now, right? 20 years. The amount of changes, the amount of discovery we're going to find in this next 20 years. Well, actually, what is it? The 50 years from now, how does that thing go? 50 years from now, everything we know will 90% of everything we know about the universe we will learn in the next 50 years. That's what it is.
That kind of hurt my head a little bit. 90%.
Isn't that crazy?
That's interesting.
I'm still not a 50-year-old man, but if you think about it, you're like, how much of this technology just looking around here wasn't here when I was born? How much of what we know about the universe, about diseases, about genetics weren't really here 50 years ago. I mean, it's a completely different world.
Well, speaking of new technology, I have one more interesting thing about cordless power that does not involve a battery. Interesting stuff. So researchers at the Fraunhofer Institute for Ceramic Technologies and Systems in Hermsdorf, Germany, succeeded in wirelessly transmitting power from a portable transmitter module to a mobile generator module, which was a receiver. And what they did was there was a rotating magnet driven by an EC motor generator that created a magnetic rotary field from this rotating magnet. And it was a magnetic pellet in the receiver would then start rotating from the magnetic rotary field that would create energy. And so they'd be creating energy directly in the module, the receiver that you're trying to get energy to. And in a lot of cases, they were looking at doing this for things like pacemakers, a lot of medical uses. So this magnetic field can travel through biological tissue, bones, organs, water, plastic, even some metals, and get to the receiver that way. And they're saying that there are no harmful side effects on humans at all from this magnetic rotary field. And of course, they're thinking about medical uses, but you can think way far in advance now and think that we won't need batteries anymore. We can just have these rotary fields everywhere we go, and all of our electrical equipment will just constantly be getting energy and be running without the need for a battery or charging or anything like that. But then, of course, I'm immediately thinking about, wonder what it's like to be immersed in a magnetic rotary field all the time. And does it really have no harmful side effects if you have it for a long-term period of time? I mean, I know magnetic fields can be positive or negative depending on some people's health in some cases. So I don't know. I'm just curious about that.
And we are on a giant rotating magnetic field right now too, the planet Earth. So hopefully,
touche.
Hopefully it's not too bad. I think that's it, though. I think we've reached the end of another episode of This Week in Science. We're supposed to say stuff at the end of the show. What are we?
On next week's show, Kiki will be back, and we'll be talking about science that makes news.
Ooh. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Twis is also available as a podcast. Just Google This Week in Science in the iTunes directory. Or if you have an Android device in the Android marketplace, you can look for Twis 4 Droid. That's TWIS, the number 4, then Droid in the Android marketplace. We're also in the iTunes or the iPhones marketplace as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes will be available on our website, www.twis.org. We also want to hear from you, so email us at kirsten@thisweekinscience.com or justin@thisweekinscience.com.
Be sure to put Twis, TWIS, somewhere in the subject line, or your email will be spam filtered into oblivion. You can also contact us on the Twitter at TwisScience, TWISCIENCE, at Dr. Kiki or at Jacksonfly. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, please let us know.
And also, I have a Twitter now. My Twitter is at Blair's Menagerie. And I have been putting up animal photos and facts all week. So go ahead and follow me on Twitter. We will be
Google
back
Menagerie.
here next week.
You know how to spell it.
Oh, Menagerie, MENAGERIE. We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for some more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from today's show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming. coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth, and I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. 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 And This Week in Science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say, and if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma, gondii. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 Got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 Science.